This is Brad with E3 Designs showing you how to install your new zip pod motor mount. We're going to install it with the foil drive V1 motor with a 15 centimeter cable. It's going on a foil drive slim, not that it matters, and we've got an Armstrong A+ mast today. So we're going to do a walkthrough highlighting each of the steps, especially the more what I think are the critical ones to get it looking nice and real streamlined. We'll walk through the tools we got. Well, one, we've got what came in your kit, which is your zip pod, some bolt hole plugs. There should be spares in your kit. 2 zip ties is all we need, but you also have spares. There's these motor fairing cable guides for the rear edge of the mast and a roll of electrical tape that I had. I've got the foil drive Allen driver. I've wrapped it with a little bit of masking tape. You'll see why later on. I've got the motor and the 3 screws that hold down the connector in the back. I've got a small flathead screwdriver, scissors, a sharp X-Acto or utility knife. Some fingernail clippers help out later on. I've got a little bit of tape for temporary marking. And I've got either a file or sandpaper for your zip pod, just to make sure the edges are smooth. And this is blue Loctite, not red. Do not use red Loctite. This is a little blue Loctite for the bolts that hold the motor in. So we're going to start from scratch, as if you just took off your existing universal mount. So this is true for V1 and V2 motors. You're going to use this wrench to take out the 4 bolts that hold the motor puck on. You're going to reuse these bolts when you attach the motor to the zip pod. We're going to set those bolts aside. This should wiggle loose out of that heat shrink. Be careful not to bend your wires. That's why it's there, is for strain relief and protection. So don't do that too much. And you can see that the motor is going to mount to the zip pod like so. And this is going to be sliding onto the mast. So what I do is take a little piece of tape, and you're going to use that to mark how high you want your motor. And what we're going to do is temporarily put the connector in. And we're going to figure out about, with the cable slack we want, at what elevation we want to attach the zip pod. And we're going to mark it a little bit above where the motor lies. We're going to take this off. We're going to detach the motor. And we're going to wrap the mast with electrical tape to protect it from any sand or abrasion that might get in there. We're going to trim the tape. Now what we want is, we always want the trailing edge of the tape facing backwards so water can't open it up. So if you imagine, we're going to wrap it one time, and we only want to put 1 layer of tape on each side. We don't want to really double it up because it wasn't designed for that excess thickness. So we're going to want to start, you know, as high up as the tape is. Make sure the mast is clean. We're going to install it a little behind the leading edge of the mast. Just like a decal or a sticker, we're going to try to not entrap any air or wrinkles. Okay, so let me use my headlamp. Maybe you can see the leading edge of the tape is there. I'm going to smooth it out. I'm going to wrap around. And I'm going to cover the leading edge just by a little bit. A little bit of overlap, but not so far back it's going to interfere where the zip pod interfaces to the mast. Clip it, make sure you're pretty wrinkle free. Okay. Double check that your zip pod slides on it nicely. It could and should be a little snug. You don't want to mess up the tape you just put on there, so you might double check that the leading edges are smooth on the inside. And that you're not going to bunch up the tape you just put on there. Now you want to make sure that the notch for your cable exit is facing the right way, which is down towards the mast. You know, a V1 motor, it's kind of a flat interface with a recessed pocket. V2 has the cutout for the removable cable. So we know how high we want it to be because we marked it earlier. If you need to, you can kind of lick and spit so you don't bunch up the tape if it helps. You slide it on. So now, if you look inside here, you'll see through holes for the zip ties. So with the knuckle clasp facing outward, we're going to slide one forward and slide the other forward like that. Okay. We're going to wrap it around and slide the upper and lower one into place. So we've got these tails here at the end. We've got our notch facing the right way, which is downward. We've got the pod at the right elevation and it's pushed on there. And we're going to barely put the zip tie through until you hear it latch. And I say barely because we've got the cables loose up here. Now you're going to gently pull and you're going to make sure that your zip ties are horizontal and they're not all cattywampus tilted like that. And you can kind of see them embedded here below flush. So once everything looks about right, and that's part of the reason for the electrical tape. It helps the zip tie bite into the front so it doesn't really slide on you afterwards. We're going to wiggle them and pull them as tight as we can by hand. If you want to, but I don't recommend it, you can use pliers to give it a little more snug of a grip if you got slippery hands. Just don't pull them so hard that they snap at this point, because you don't want to preload the zip ties too much and stretch them. The weak spot of the zip tie is up here. That's where it failed when I did load testing. This thing holds 120 pounds when pulled backwards. And this is where they failed, not at the clasp. And you want to inspect the zip ties to make sure there's no like nicks or burrs that would create a failure point. If there are, throw it away and use a spare one. So our zip pod is installed. And you really only got to do it by hand. You don't have to crank it down until it breaks like some people do. So now I find nail clippers to be kind of the best thing. You can get an initial cut with scissors, and then you can kind of nibble it away. Just until it's below flush. Just below flush. You don't need to get it all the way down inside next to the zip tie. That actually creates a weaker system. So just below flush, hand tight. Now's a good time to check, is it snug? So really, you shouldn't be able to twist it, because once you put a motor on, it's going to be easier to do that. You just want to check to make sure there's no obvious issues so far. So the zip pot is installed. Now it's no different than you would do with a regular four-wheel drive motor installation. You can verify that it's in the right spot once again before you proceed by putting the plug in. You can hold the motor in place. And check that it all looks good. You got some clearance here from the cable to the trailing edge of the mast, because you're about to slide these trailing edge cable fairings on. And so with your flathead screwdriver, you can pry that connector back off gently. So now we're going to install the motor. So we're going to use these 4 reused bolts from when we pulled off the puck. And what I like to do is, this is true for the regular foil drive universal mount, or this mount, or really any fasteners that I use, is I use a dab of blue Loctite. Oh, wrong way. This is where if you have a friend, it helps a little bit, but not required. So if I take these bolts and I just go one, two, three, four. Now what I said earlier was I wrapped this Allen wrench with a little bit of masking tape. And what that does is kind of helps to keep it centered in the hole, because these button head screws are a little bit difficult to find the center. So we're going to take one screw, only one first. We're going to drop it down. We're going to loosely attach the motor. What I do in general with anything is I drive the screw in reverse to make sure I don't cross thread it. You want to rotate it backwards until you feel the threads of the motor. You can see the screw sticking out here. So I've got one screw engaged. Now I can drop the other 3 screws in. You may need to wiggle the screws so they find the center and they fall through. Never tighten any screw until they're all 4 at least engaged, because you may be locking yourself in the wrong position. If you need to, you can wiggle it. Once I get the last one in, I tighten it till it's snug, and then I go snug the other 3. And this is just, the same torque you would do with the foil drive motor puck. you know, it's just snug. There's no torque value. It's like, you know, finger tight. Not too much, not too little. The blue Loctite helps you not worry so much about how perfectly you torqued it, as long as they're snug and preloaded a little bit. Maybe I did not mention it, but that leading edge of when we slid this cone on, if that wasn't smooth, it was going to catch on the electrical tape, so I had sanded ahead of time the inside of that. So our motor's installed to the zip pod. We can definitely remove the marking tape at this point. And now's a good time to inspect it, make sure there's no edges sticking up. Got a little air bubble there. I've got more tape on that side. Now with the motor on again, now's a good time to check that you tightened up the zip ties enough. Okay. There's going to be a little bit of flex, but the thing is that it's not going anywhere. And it's sleek and you know, as long as it's smooth, check your gaps here, make sure there's nothing off. You can see, like, by design there is a small gap everywhere except the leading edge. The leading edge should be tight, but elsewhere, if you have a small gap, you know, about the size of your driver's license or credit card, that's not the end of the world. I'd rather have the front be tight and the rest be loose, so it's a strong fit. Okay, so the motor's on. Now we take a trailing edge cable fairing. These are shaped differently between V1 and V2 motors. They should be marked accordingly. If they're not right for your motor type, stop. Let us know. We'll get you the right one ASAP. So that basically slides up, and you can see how the cable is going to fit right in there. And before you put the connector down, you're going to choose from the sizes I gave you. You're going to see how far you normally would tape your cable. Now, if you're trying to run all the way to the base, you got this leading edge that's curved. It's never going to let the electrical tape sit flush. So, like for me, when I get this resistance here in the wide part of the mast, I look and I say, am I going to be able to get electrical tape there without it bunching up and wrinkling? And really, I shouldn't be riding with that part in the water if I'm going fast. So I always err to just have a little better tape job and stop it right there. That's in. Make sure that my connector, and like any reassembly, you would want to check that you're greased up good, you don't have any debris or FOD in the seal, and that you can push it down all the way. And that's where we're going to reuse the 3 screws that hold the connector down. I'm just going to skip the step about the blue Loctite here, but let's see. Okay, so all that's left is to apply electrical tape like you would with your stock foil drive assembly, Manta assembly, whatever brand is popular at the moment. And this is where there's a little bit of perfection and craftsmanship. So we got our mask. We want to make sure there's no sand or leftover adhesive that's going to give us a bad wrinkle. And what you do is the side that doesn't have the cable showing, that's where we're going to start. Okay, and just like up here, we're going to start with the tape in the center of the mast. We're going to wrap around so that the cut edge is facing backwards. The water can't peel it off. But what you do, because this you want to pull tight against your mast, we're actually going to start the tape. Let's see how best to do this. We're going to start the tape on the plastic thing, the fairing. We're going to get a good seal like that. And then here's where we're going to apply some tension. And pull down. And this is what takes a little bit of finesse. If you lick your finger, it helps to slide it down. Push the wrinkles out. Remember, we want to just do one wrap. You can do two, but you want it to overlap your start point. And then you want to cut it so the edge faces backwards. You can see it's a little wrinkled. So slowly work it from front to back to get all the wrinkles out. And you're going to take a look. We're going to do the same thing again. Remember, we start on the side that doesn't have the cable exposed. Now we're going to bring the tape to the bottom edge and align it with the cable fairing. I'm going to not pass it over onto the mast just yet because I want all of this to be able to be snug. Here's where I give it another decent pull downwards. I'm going to try to align the tape to the bottom edge still. Okay, it's looking pretty clean. Check it now before you wrap around. And again, I'm trying to line the tape up to this other opposite edge of the fairing. So I hold it there. And this is where if you go much further, it gets difficult. It's hard to make it look nice. Again, if you need to give it the old hawk to finish it out without trapping air, you can lick your finger and kind of smear it around. It does a pretty good job. And we want to make sure we overlapped it. Cut it off. So some people will, earlier on, you might want to put a second piece of tape if you don't want to have your graphite showing there, but it doesn't really matter. It's just for looks. And you're good to go. I take that back, you're not. What you got to do is plug these motor holes, motor mount holes. So the 4 rubber plugs that are supplied in the kit, you just push them backwards. They got a little notch so that you could always pull them out easily with a screwdriver. I'll show you that. They're keyed so they can only go in one way. And if you need to ever get them out, you just, when you go to take your thing apart to clean your kit, redo the tape underneath there, whatever. For whatever reason, you just pop them out and you can disassemble everything. What I did forget to show you was the V2 motor. So the V2 motor, which has that interchangeable cable, that type of motor has a big pocket for the cable to go in. You know, the factory version and this version. So similar, what you do, same thing, you put the zip tie in when it's on your mast. You'll cinch it down by hand. If you want to, very carefully, you can give it a few more clicks with pliers. And same thing, so they're just, the zip ties are a little deeper. They're a little harder to reach, but you can snip the excess off. You can use fingernail clippers. To get it down below flush. I did find that baby fingernail clippers are a little skinnier, and that pocket is just big enough so they can reach a little further. You want to make sure the zip ties are below this plane. They should be below there, and then down here they should be clipped down to where they don't interfere with your plug. And it is okay to go down and clip them flush. I know it's not the best practice, but in that configuration is what these things were tested to, and they exceeded 100 pounds of holding force for 3 days straight. So cut them flush, then you install your motor, clamp it, make sure the gaps are good before you proceed. So that's it. Got your zip pod. Make sure the zip ties are parallel, installed the way you want. Press these blockers in there.